to continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
He came in by accident because he never expected to be President of the United States. Nixon was obligated to leave and was exiled to the West Coast as a result of Watergate, and Ford came in. Since the Fords came in by accident, they needed a press secretary. Mrs. Ford needed a press secretary. So Bonnie Angelo, who had been bureau chief for Time magazine, and Claire Crawford, who had helped start People magazine, was a Washington correspondent for People at that time, recommended me. And I went for an interview in Virginia because the Fords, as I said, came in by accident and hadn't yet moved into the White House. So I went for my interview and I got the job. With Betty Ford, it was sort of a mother-daughter relationship, I felt. I went out to the Virginia White House, as we called it then, in Alexandria, where she lived, and when I arrived, it was amongst packing boxes, and her daughter was in the kitchen reading reviews of the night before. There had been a big state dinner, and Betty Ford came down in her robe, and I really had no idea what a press secretary was supposed to do. So I said, well, what do you expect me to do? And she said, well, how should I know? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I went home thinking, well, that didn't go very well, did it? I should have told her something. And then I started to think, well, it's got to be more than just telling the press the clothes she's wearing, what the fabric is, and, you know, handling things like that. There had to be really something to it. So I thought, okay, I can do that. That's what I've been doing in television. So I can try to make it a more meaningful job. And so I arrived at the White House, and I guess she said I got her into a lot of hot water. I think controversy sometimes is good, and there was a lot of controversy in terms of some of the things that she discussed. And they didn't expect that from a First Lady. But in the end, everything worked out beautifully. The mood of the staff did not change until Betty Ford and the President said, why don't you say good morning to me? Why don't you talk to us when we talk? And they said, because that's the way, we weren't supposed to do that. The whole tone changed when the Fords came in. They were very loving, warm people who wanted interaction with other people. What I learned when the Carters came in, that there's this long period of, after the election, of staff coming in, presidents learning about the job, and there was no learning time. So it was just, all of a sudden you're in, you're plopped down, and you're ready to go. The interesting thing also is what's going on with the staff. And the whole behind the scenes that, you know, we think of the jubilation and everybody's so excited about an inauguration of a president and they want to be part of it. And at the White House you have people who, there are some who are concerned about what they're going to be doing next. There are some who think that maybe it's nice to have time off. There are some who are really angry that they lost, the election was lost. And others who are okay with it and just, you know, feel it's time to move on. There is a certain gloom and awkwardness to it. We see, you walk through the halls and you see packing boxes and the walls are bare. And I remember the last day when I had to sign out. I took the last day to sign out. There are about 20 different offices you have to go to, or at least at that time there were. You have to give up your page boy and your telephone and your ID, your White House ID, and your passport. Anyway, it goes on and on and on, what you have to give up. And you have to be signed out. And I happened to have done that the very last day, and then did that prior to the 20th of January. But I did it after I came from the swearing in of Carter, who was then the president, and returned back, and I couldn't get over it because I went to my office just to say a quick goodbye, and everything was off the walls. And nothing was on my desk. And I had placed a picture that had been taken of me of the new press secretary of Mrs. Carter coming in, Mary Hoyt, with Mrs. Carter's assistant, and signed it And that was about all that was in the office. I mean, everything had been removed. And I knew it was no longer my office, it was now theirs. My father had been in Eisenhower's administration, and I'll never forget, he had been Secretary of the Cabinet. And when I came in, he said, remember that when the gates close, that's it. So whatever you can do, do it. And I took that very seriously. And then I saw him at the very end, because what I also liked to do at the very end was to take the press on tour so they could see this White House. Basically, they're all in cubicles. It sounds very glamorous, but they all have these little cubicles, and they never really get to see much of the garden in the private areas. I didn't take them to all, but I took them to some. But it was really something to walk out from my office, down the corridor, out the door, and in the jubilation of the inauguration, which was happening at that time, know that it was the last moment, that everything that I could have done, because you don't go back again. Or some people do, but not in the same way. Definitely not in the same way.